Good evening, everybody. So we have heard so many great topics. We have heard so many great speakers today. So please welcome our good friend Anthony as a moderator for the last panel today, talking with his participants about the future of the consumer product additive manufacturing landscape. Anthony, happy to have you here. The stage is all yours.
I do want to thank everybody for joining this panel discussion. I was excited to be invited to help moderate, particularly with the guests that we have today. My name is Anthony Graves, and I'm part of a new group inside of HP, part of a new division inside of HP called Strategy and Incubation. And my group is a digital manufacturing software and solutions group. And our mandate is to help identify tool sets and help develop the mindsets around scaling additive manufacturing. Now, our focus is a little bit different, but complementary to that of Link3D, who we've been friends with for a long time. We're actually a customer of Link3D, believe it or not. And so we have been introducing some new products last fall. We introduced a product called the HP Universal Build Manager powered by Dendrite, which is an automated build management solution designed to power some applications like something we call Smart Factory, as well as hopefully applications like Link3D in the future. And our vision is around essentially creating opportunities around personalization, customization, and on-demand manufacturing. So the same way that Link3D, as Vishal mentioned in his presentation, which I thought that was a great video, how they're trying to bring all of the 3D printer OEMs together to work on a more unified approach. I think they called it Unifying 3D. That's our vision as well, and that's why we work with most of the OEMs, just like Link3D, if not almost all of them, as well as other independent software developers to add complementary technologies, all about accomplishing that same vision, enabling the scaling of additive manufacturing through automation. So that's a little bit about me. What I'd like to do is allow our guests to introduce themselves. We'll start with Jason, who's a senior manufacturing innovation engineer and additive manufacturing staff manager at New Balance. So Jason, go ahead and take it away, bud.
Thanks, Anthony. I've been at New Balance for about seven and a half years now, focused on 3D printing for about 3 years as my primary function there. And I've been with the program, taking it from at a lab scale with a handful of printers and scaling it to a full manufacturing endeavor within our Lawrence facility. I'm looking to scale it further beyond that in a separate facility coming down the pipeline in a couple years now. But with that process, you imagine in scaling, there's a lot of things that I can speak to, especially in the Q&A session on challenges along the way, scaling up hardware, software, facilities, and so forth. So that's really where my head's been. In the past, I've done other digital manufacturing initiatives with New Balance and my former employers. So I'm happy to be here on the panel today, and thanks for having me speak.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. Next, we're going to turn our attention to Will Hilgenberg, who has a company called Albatross Bikes. He's the founder. So why don't you take it away, Will?
Thank you, Anthony. So yeah, my name is Will Hilgenberg, and as Anthony brought up, I am the founder of Albatross Bikes. And what we do and what we're really known for are being bespoke frame builders. So we try to do what we can to provide the best experience for our customers. And to do so, what we do is we combine modern engineering and classic design in what we tend to call a blended workflow. So that's working with traditional manufacturing, so methods such as brazing, welding, machining, casting, along with some of the more cutting-edge manufacturing techniques, specifically additive manufacturing, and also parametric CAD. And by doing so, what we're able to do is utilize the best method for each problem that we come up against, and be able to create an entire ecosystem for our customers. And alongside with our own customer direct work, we also do work with other businesses in the frame building space, advising on additive manufacturing, as well as providing actual contract engineering for businesses that may not have the capabilities or the experience with additive manufacturing, or in some of these more traditional engineering and manufacturing methods, and be able to let them kind of actualize what their own ideas are.
Awesome. Thank you, Will, for that. And Daniel, he was rapid prototyping engineer at Hasbro, is our last guest. And I believe it's Daniel, is it D'Amico? D'Amico.
Yeah.
God, I practiced that.
That's
I'm
all
sorry.
right.
Why don't you go ahead and take it away? Thanks, buddy.
No problem, Anthony. How you doing? Daniel D'Amico. Been with Hasbro now 8 years. Been in the 3D printing world since 2007. So it's been a little bit for me. At Hasbro, we support about 1,600 new products a year. Most of that comes through this department. We've got about, I'd say, almost 30 different printers from various OEMs. So most of them are SLA or FDM. But there's about 5 people in this department, and we're turning out quite a few parts a year, which is fun. So anywhere from 25 to 35,000 parts a year, but also a lot of investigation into most cutting edge technologies, new innovations, a little bit of 3D scanning here as well. So a lot of fun stuff.
Awesome, thank you. Thanks for that. So the topic of this entire event is consumer additive manufacturing, and you guys are plugged directly into that group and or that industry, I should say, of users. And it's unique because we're not talking necessarily about industrial or engineered parts, even though a lot of engineering obviously goes into everything that you guys do. But my first question that I wanted to ask is, I've always been a believer that the consumer doesn't necessarily care how their parts are produced. They just want good things, right? They want good phone cases, they want good footwear, they want good stereos, good cars, etc. But some people have been challenging that theory of mine recently. You are directly interfacing with the customers on a daily basis. How much of additive manufacturing plays into their perception of the benefits of the products that you're delivering?
How much of that plays into it? I think when it comes to like speed to market.
Okay, yeah.
Manufacturing gets into, for us, it's movie properties. A lot of that stuff is hush hush, and then when it hits big in the movie or in a TV show, it's like, how quickly can we get to market? So I think looking at additive manufacturing as a solution is definitely a quicker way of getting there than traditional manufacturing.
Right. And
so,
Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, that's internally, I think, but yeah, customers just kind of want it fast. So I don't know what they necessarily are as geeked out about it as like we are.
Right. So yours is, you would say it's a means to an end for you guys, but obviously your customers, the fact that it's manufactured through AM doesn't impress them necessarily. They just want the product and they want it fast. I know it took like a year to get the Baby Yoda out, and everybody was upset about that. But Jason, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, Anthony, I think I echo a bit what you were saying about, do customers actually care about where it comes from? They just want it to be able to use the end product. I have a similar opinion where let me rephrase that. We're in a transitional phase at New Balance where we've made many batches of 3D printed product and put it out there in the world. But the way we've marketed it, and I say this as an engineer and not as someone in marketing or product design, is we've highlighted some of the 3D printed properties and really focused on what the product can do from a 3D printed lattice or performance aspect of that. But that really works for smaller batches or leading edge product. Because we're manufacturing in smaller batches, and it might be early, at least for New Balance, to release some of these as far as like a cost perspective, because we're doing smaller batches. The product that we're making might be higher cost to the company to make, rather than a few years down the road where we're doing this at such a large volume that we're able to reduce the cost of materials going in and go from less of a batch perspective to more of a mass manufactured approach. So really what I'm saying is when we're making smaller batches, you're really pushing these to the consumers that are at the leading edge of adopting something like this. And I think that's a really important way to market your product as you're releasing these. And then maybe down the road, as you're making more and more of these, you're maybe looking to reach a similar type of customer, but one that might not necessarily be as interested in how it's made, but how it can get to them and what it can do for them.
Sure. And probably most people, particularly consumers, are probably more familiar with additive when it comes to footwear, more so necessarily than the products that Hasbro was putting out. But on bicycles, you know, what's the connection between the consumer, their perception, and what types of products that you're delivering, Will?
I would definitely say that the consumer right now in the bike industry is a little bit more unique in that the bicycle industry in itself is a very technical industry, and the average consumer actually is very educated on manufacturing techniques, whether it's forged or you could get into composites like pre-preg, and they understand that all these different methods exist and that there has been excellent marketing language behind that to help sell these things. So when in the last probably 3 years, we've seen additive manufacturing become one of those selling points. It's the newest, it's the latest manufacturing method. So all the language around that has been that, yes, you can use additive manufacturing to do new things that we haven't been able to do before using traditional manufacturing techniques, which give you a performance benefit. But also because bicycles as a product, your design, your actual design surfaces, your appearance of the product is the structural component. When you start looking at additive manufacturing, what it can do from a structural standpoint, it's also affecting the aesthetic, and the consumer responds very well to that.
Yeah, one of the interesting things, we had a conversation before this event, and a lot of the bicycle industry companies are really cottage industries in and of themselves. They may produce, a company may focus on cages for water bottles. And we were talking about how many cages I broke because depending upon the size of the frame and where you mount the cages, you're going to be busting those cages trying to get the water bottle out. And so I think there's an expectation, certainly, that additive manufacturing should allow these smaller companies to really innovate and come up with solutions that companies are looking for. Now, what I wanted to find out from each of you, and maybe Jason, we'll start with you first this time around, is as you're focused on production, obviously, and even though Daniel mentioned that they were producing 25,000, 35,000 parts, which is a lot, in the footwear industry, obviously the industry is huge. The amount of customers that you're potentially marketing to and supplying products to. What are some of the surprises that you sort of discovered in your journey to scale additive manufacturing at New Balance?
Early days, I would say it was really understanding just how much print volume we would need prior to releasing a product. You can always plan a roadmap and timelines and put people and resources against those, but really understanding how much process development is in place to develop a full manufacturing system. And I'm not talking about making dozens of parts at a time. I'm talking about making thousands and thousands of parts in a serialized fashion. The amount of materials and printing you need to do to validate that process was something that I found was much larger than I initially would have imagined. And I speak again from spinning this up from a handful of printers to dozens of printers. Certainly you learn a lot as you go along that path, but developing these processes, documenting it, putting together SOPs and so forth, so that you can move from a system of just making in batch to really just cranking out part after part. It takes quite a bit. I don't want to say the amount of volume that we printed.
Right.
I don't think I can speak to that, but it was much larger than certainly than I had imagined we would have done.
Okay, Daniel, what about you?
So we're not manufacturing end-use parts, mainly prototyping, but it's very interesting to think of it, Jason, is how you kind of scale up from a couple printers to full-on production in that ratio. Like, how do you get that right? Especially, depending on the technologies that you're working on, right? You've got the if you've got the SLA, then you've got the washes and the cures and what that process is, and you can plan out that as much as you'd like, but how do you get that down perfectly? So I think that's super interesting to me.
So let me jump in real quick, Daniel. So your primary use of AM is really around prototyping. Was that iterating to get a product to production more quickly? Okay. Correct. Using more traditional methods, injection molding probably being one of the biggest that you guys rely on. And so do you ever see, when you look through a catalog of parts, do you ever see yourselves relying more on additive for production, for more personalized products that you guys may come out with in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, what Jason was talking about is kind of some of the struggles when you look for that, how do you get to market, because, like Will said, it has to look good, right? So some parts that are very strong and ready for production now may not look the best without a lot of post-processing. And for us, that's time and, against it. And so how do you, that starts to eat into how quickly you can get it to market, right? So, everything we print or make has to look really good.
Well, I want to come back to that question, and I'll come back to you on that, Daniel, around post-processing and finishing. But Will, you mentioned that one of the things that you do is you advise other frame builders, among other people, on additive manufacturing, how they can potentially leverage it to help their company out. And you also mentioned that you could do some of that work for them if they didn't necessarily want to make the investment into additive themselves. When you look at the production at your volumes, do you find it that it's more attractive to work with some of the existing service bureaus and contract manufacturers out there, or at the price points that your products fall in, is it something where you see additive something companies could incorporate into their business and manage their own production? Is there a balance there?
Absolutely. So there is, most of my customers that I tend to work with on the business side, we work with them and they're a little too small to bring it in-house, whether that's from basically from a time and space concern. I mean, we have some of the people we've worked with in the past are literally working in a shipping container for their shop. So the idea of bringing in a 3D printer with all its support material or support machinery becomes a lot more challenging. Whereas we've also worked with companies that are much larger that already have 3D printing capabilities, and they can bring in a different printer because they have the capital. So it's a real mix. But with the smaller kind of companies that we do work with, having the ability to work directly with other manufacturing outsourcing, basically methodologies with 3D printing, that is usually what we end up leveraging. And with changes in the actual software packaging and the front end of a lot of these companies, what we're able to do is work with the customer directly and provide them with the CAD files, provide them with a little bit more of the technical know-how on how to develop these products. And they're able to take that knowledge in a package and hand it off for their own manufacturing. So they have a little bit more control and a little bit more identity in the actual parts that they're producing, rather than just handing off the entire process to us.
Right. And so I'm still going to come back to finishing here in a second, but I want to ask you, because you just brought it up, software, most people in the industry, and I've heard a number of OEMs talk about it, where the technology with respect to the print processes and the devices that are out there, whether it's a 3D print system or it's a post-processing system from somebody like AMT or Dimension, and there's others that are out there, the hardware technology has advanced. The material science has advanced even, I would say, more rapidly over the last couple of years. Software has always been considered a limiting factor in allowing people to really embrace additive. If you want to call it design for additive, you could. Maybe from a designer and engineering standpoint, it makes sense. Most people that are from the manufacturer will just call it design for manufacturing. But do you see the current state of software, and maybe we could pick on CAD CAM a little bit, as a limiting factor in being able to scale up or react more quickly to consumer demands? And I'll start with Jason on this one. Oh, you're muted. No problem.
I'll get this right. Yeah, as far as design for additive in the sneaker business, we do a few tricks to help us peel our parts from our build plates or our build platforms. There's a couple tricks that we can do just to speed it up, reduce defects. That isn't necessarily built into any of the main players' software that we've seen out there. It's just more unique to our product and our process. So we're using some more off-the-shelf softwares that are out there that you might see in any industry, rather than specifically for 3D printing to accomplish those design for 3D printing or design for additive process-based improvements on our actual models. And again, that's really meant to help speed along the process, improve yield, because as you imagine, especially starting up a process for 3D printing, a company that's new to it at least, really getting to an ROI that makes sense for the company is super critical. So when you have yields that are low to start out, that can be a bit discouraging for some folks, and of course, as you learn more and you're improving a process and techniques, those yields might come up. But really looking at the models that you make and designing them so that they can be optimized, at least in our case, for post-processing, will certainly improve your yield to start out. And then as you learn more, you can certainly make iterations on that and improve your design and maybe ultimately your yield down the road as you get better at things.
Yeah, and we spoke too about a little bit about this before the event, where Jason's some of the types of products that they're using, like around lattice generation and things like that. Right now, that is sort of a gap in the design tools that are out there. You sort of have to, I don't want to say cobble together, because the solutions are probably better integrated than they ever have been, a little bit past cobbling. But it still does require some manual programming and tweaking to really get the results you're looking for, rather than products maybe from Hasbro or Albatross, Daniel and Will. But let me ask this question, because I don't want to run out of time. I think it's very important, and that is this topic of post-processing and finishing. Everybody knows if you CNC machine parts, whether it's out of metal, wood, plastics, you know what surface finish you're going to get based on speeds and feeds and tools that you use and things like that. Same thing with injection molding, particularly. I mean, everyone in especially Hasbro is probably one of the experts in the world at injection molding and understanding the science behind that and the materials. I saw at AMUG, where Daniel, I met Daniel at AMUG from Link3D, BASF was there, and they were introducing some new finishes that they were making available to customers, in addition to the materials themselves, some finishing processes. Do you guys see surface finish, as a gap to embracing additive? And maybe even if not directly for your particular company, but for other consumer products, when you talk to other engineers, do you see that as something maybe other companies, BASF and Evonik and others, need to focus more on? Or the post-processing companies? Where do you see the current evolution of post-processing? And Daniel, I'll pass it over to you real quick.
Sure. Yeah, I think surface finish always matters. I mean, you want to have a sharp looking part for sure. It's kind of some of the printers that have the highest resolution also might be the most brittle, and materials might have the roughest surfaces. So it's like you could go to production with this material, but it wouldn't look the best without some type of post-processing. So how do you kind of tie all that stuff together? I think, even going back to the software question, there's definitely a lot of softwares you'd have to get to integrate to help speed up process of additive manufacturing, and mass customization, because it's got to be wild to take in a lot of orders of different parts and have to have them all orientated differently on the same printers and have the printers optimized for all of them. Then you come through those separate printers and come to the post-processing station and say, well, these things are all just a bit different. That's the best way to post-process them all the same. How many different processes would you need for those? So yeah, I think there's still some work to be done there as well.
Right. Now I have a special question for Will, but first I want to jump over to Jason to follow up on that, because whether even for some of your more elite athletes or serious athletes, that are looking for more of the performance aspect of footwear, for example. It's still fashion, right? People still want to, they want their footwear to look good. And when you're dealing with some of these new materials, surface finish is important because you're looking to get, whether it's textured or whether it's smooth, you're looking for that surface finish. And carbon, I participated in a panel earlier in the week, I think it was, with the CTO from Carbon, and he was mentioning that they had a new technology for spinning some of the material off to clean the parts. And that was important for them, not only for getting to post-processing more quickly, but also sustainability and things like that. But for you guys, where do you see post-processing and surface finishing playing in your business?
It's critical. The amount of customers that are looking for a product that is like perfect is probably 100%. I mean, everyone buys shoes. Everyone out there has looked at sole units that are injection molded when they purchase a shoe, probably. So you imagine people buying first quality shoes would expect first quality product. Otherwise, they'd be buying them as like B grades or in factory stores or at some sort of discount. So yeah, if we're making 3D printed product, chances are it's going to be a bit higher price than an injection molded or otherwise part or product. So the consistency in making the parts have brilliant surface finish is yeah, it's like the most important part of the process. At least in New Balance's case, our process window is very tight due to the chemistry of both the resin that we're using, the elastomeric resin that we're using to 3D print our midsoles, and the chemicals that we're using in the post-process procedure to actually finish these parts and both wash and cure these parts all the way. So if we're off by a few seconds or have a chemistry issue or saturation issue with some of our cleaning chemicals, for example, that will completely change the way the part performs. It might change the surface finish. It might change dimensional aspects of the part. And that's a non-starter for our product, because as the weeks of printing go on, you're matching up a left part and a right part for shoes. And if the left part and the right part are performing differently, look different, or anything else, that's basically a part that or a pair of shoes that's going to ultimately be a failure, and the customer is not going to enjoy that kind of product. So post-processing, in summary, is hypercritical for us.
Sure. And by the way, we're getting some really good questions. For those of you who are watching, you can go over to the Q&A, tab, and you can upvote the questions that you want to see over there that you'd like us to address once we go to the Q&A session. There was a good one here, and it sort of ties into the question that I had for Will. And that was, some of the real benefit for additive manufacturing is taking more control over the supply chain. And for the smaller the company, the more risk involved, the more vulnerable you are if you don't have control over the manufacturing process. Has additive manufacturing versus some of the maybe traditional manufacturing that you either do in-house or outsource, do you find that to be the case? The reason I ask is there's more machine shops, CNC machine shops, if you will, than there are additive machine shops. What are your thoughts on that, and how to mitigate risk for small businesses leveraging additive?
So this is something that is incredibly crucial right now, especially in the bike industry. The bike industry, along with many other outdoor sporting goods industries, are seeing a huge demand. And as we've seen in all the industries right now, an extreme shortage of product. So right now, there's small frame builders are going out of business. Bike shops are going out of business because they can't get the product that they need to sell to keep the lights on. The demand's there, but they just can't get the product. So having 3D printing traditionally has been considered to be more of a prototype kind of technology and able to get your designs to market faster. Are what we're seeing now and what we've been focusing on more is developing those products that that are not terribly difficult to design and do the engineering behind, but are just non-existent because we can't get it. Whether that's bicycle saddles, whether that's water bottles, cages, like you spoke of before. Like we've personally been incorporating our own designs into water bottle cages to work more cohesively with our designs. And we're also sidestepping a lot of the demand issues that we're seeing right now. I mean, bicycle saddles, for example, you can 3D print the top, you can 3D print the shell, but you're still going to work with the actual traditional manufacturing methods in order to attach it to the frame. So you can use it in combination to help vertically integrate your entire company if you have the engineering expertise and technical know-how, which is kind of where we kind of step in as well, is we're able to help other companies with that technical know-how and be able to vertically integrate through the use of 3D printing to have a short-term product line without having to open tooling and increase the workflow that way.
Great. Yeah, there was a question over here, and I'm going to tie it into sustainability because well, first of all, just a quick question around the table, particularly for Daniel and Jason, is most larger companies, sustainability is a huge, it's an important topic, not only internally with the company, but with investors, shareholders, and folks like that. Sustainability on a scale of, let's say, 1 to 10, how much does that play into your thoughts around additive manufacturing? Daniel, we'll start with you.
Yeah, for us, it's big. You know, it's getting into post-processing for more sustainable aqueous solutions to clean the parts for a lot, because we are heavy in the SLA. So that is really important to us.
And Jason?
Yeah, from a sustainability perspective, I think it ties into how we communicate the product to the customer. We certainly have other shoes that we like, maybe we've used recycled materials or used adaptive materials from other industries in our footwear product, and we communicate that to the customer and use it to market a product. But with 3D printing, I think it's important to communicate that there is a big material savings, especially if you're doing lattice prints, where you compare them to more classically injection molded footwear sole, where it's basically an entire block of material that's going into a product or part of a product, whereas at 3D printed, we can eliminate maybe, I don't know, say 50% of the volume of material being used. And there's little waste for material when you do this at scale. On the other side of things, it's less costly, at least from a manufacturer, to 3D print these parts at scale, because when you're doing injection molding parts, the amount of tooling that you need for dozens of sizes. So I mean, for men's sizes 5 to 15, then you have to consider all the widths from A to 6E. You need a specific tooling and molds for every single one of those parts. And with footwear, it's just like other areas of the fashion industry. Trends change. You might make a product for a couple of years. You might make it for a couple months, depending on the volume outlook for that product. And with all that molding, that might sit on a shelf and take up space in a warehouse and energy to store that and costs there. Might get thrown out. It's very expensive, and we're talking tens of thousands of dollars per mold. That really adds up, and not just from a cost perspective, but from a sustainability perspective. And communicating that to the customer, I think, is really important to show how 3D printed products might reduce costs to the customer long term as the industry progresses there. And it also ultimately saves the company, the manufacturer, money in both tooling and materials.
Sure. I have a question I'm going to save for Jason, because it's the top question, but it involves serialization. During our Q&A, we'll switch over to that because I think, and it probably applies to Daniel, it applies to everyone. Serialization traceability is super important in all of manufacturing, particularly additive manufacturing, because additive is still a little bit like the Wild West. And so you absolutely want to track back to be able to identify what products are produced with what processes, not only for product development, but of course for production as well. But let me ask a completely different question to all three of you. So students, even coming out of high school now, have a lot more familiarity with additive and CAD design as well. but folks coming out of school now, whether it be a high school CET type program or the universities, are you finding new hires able to step in quickly into roles around additive, or do you still think there's a gap in education preparing students for additive specifically? And I'll start with Daniel.
I think there's so many different technologies out there that it's easy to get familiar with a couple and apply that to maybe the ones we have here. Very few schools have all the technologies we have, but a lot of those skills transfer for sure. And we do have a pretty good co-op program here, so we're always got a pretty good rotation, 3 different co-ops a year. So it's pretty fun to get them onboarded and show them all the 3D printing out of manufacturing and some 3D scanning as well. But I think they're pretty well prepared.
Okay, and Will, as a small business, I mean, do you find that a lot of people are seeking you out that have those skills, or are they just cycling enthusiasts looking to innovate and looking to get you to make better products for them and their friends? What do you find?
I would definitely say that there is a growing a growing number of people who are able to work within the additive technology manufacturing methodology. A lot of words, but a lot of that stems from early experience with CAD programs, with design, with all the digital manufacturing methods. I volunteer with the Cal Poly's SLO industry advisory board for the mechanical engineering department. And that's been a point of discussion quite often, is how do we work with students and how do we introduce curriculum into classes to ready the students for those kinds of experiences. And a lot of that, and this discussion is not limited just to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, but to many other universities where they're bringing in more additive technology into the classroom at a college level, but also starting to teach how you incorporate that into a workflow, what are the benefits of additive manufacturing, and with alongside with the popularity of FDM machines, it's a good intro point to a lot of these people to be able to work with it even in their own house and learn more of the capabilities of what you can actually do with 3D printing, as well as some of the downsides that you can occasionally see with different methodologies.
So yeah, I think that's a good answer, and you're right. And I want to tweak the question a little bit for Jason, and that is, a lot of our focus inside of HP is exploring the ways that you can expand automation, and ours is through the use of Python scripting, for example, not only in the UBM, because Dendrite, that's part of their component technology is automation through Python scripting, but also tools like Grasshopper and other quote-unquote CAD tools that are not your traditional parametric tools, like your Fusion 360s all the way to SolidWorks and CATIA and things like that, Onshape, etc. The tool sets go along with sort of the mindsets. Additive allows you to now create designs where you don't have to think about breaking them into 10 parts because they're machined. You can actually print the entire assembly. You can simplify assemblies. You can reduce the number of components, which increases performance, etc. Do you at New Balance, are you seeing this next generation of students coming out that are graduating? Do you see any evidence that additive is having an impact on how they look at designing parts and what the expectations are around the knowledge that they bring to the job, like Python, like being able to use MATLAB or other non-traditional design tools? Because you need those in order to not only automate, but create these new designs in many cases.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think students graduating today and more recently have a lot more tools at their disposal, at least from a software perspective, where a lot of the softwares are becoming a lot more democratized and user-friendly for people to pick up. There's a lower learning curve, and even just like from a licensing perspective, students and folks are able to subscribe, monthly rather than buy thousands of dollars worth of software licenses. So people are able to pick up these tools and use the learning tools that are fantastic out there for a lot of these software packages to learn themselves or learn through their universities. So yeah, at least from my perspective, I'm seeing a lot of students and those applying to New Balance come with some incredible digital skills that might not have been industry standard even 10 years ago. Where we would hire, it's not necessarily that we're looking for specific 3D printing a background or using X or Y software package or 3D printer equipment. It's more that I'd like to see folks hiring otherwise at New Balance like to see digital capabilities that students have proven themselves with some of their projects, and that they're able to learn quickly, adapt, and apply that to a physical entity, like a 3D printed or machine. So it's how do you apply what you've learned, and how do you learn to do digital rendering and manufacturing, and how can you prove that you've done that in the past, and how would you maybe apply it to something at New Balance? And then from a business perspective, once someone might be onboarded, well, these people are quick learners and hands-on, and they'll jump right into it. But from like a business process perspective and workflow perspective, I think that's the bigger hurdle that schools might to do better to prepare students for. But I'll leave that for another day. Sure.
No, thanks. And so what I want to do is we have 15 minutes left, roughly, and I want to shift over to the Q&A, and we'll start taking the questions from top to bottom. I guess. And so you guys can probably see these as well. And we'll just do a round robin, starting with Will. On the very first question here, and it may or may not apply, but you may have some opinions about it, because Will also has experience at larger companies as well, in addition to having his own business, Albatross Bikes. The future of part serialization, laser etching, nanomaterials, fingerprinting, etc. Just starting with you, Will, what are your thoughts on serialization? And perhaps maybe it also goes with traceability, trace and track and trace.
Yeah. Absolutely. So in the past, I've actually helped to develop a full RFID tagged production line. So you're able to track each product throughout its entire life cycle in the factory and see at the stages of every point in the manufacture. But also we were able to use that RFID tag with advances in smartphone technology. This was a couple of years ago. We were able to work directly with our dealerships and consumers to actually get real data quickly on the product that's may have been having a problem, and be able to trace it back through every single step in the manufacturing process to be able to sort out what's wrong. I mean, QR codes for sure are used, but then you're also running into the issues of wear over time, kind of obscuring them. Same with laser etching. It's like having something that's built into and is not visible in the product is very beneficial for the end user, as well as ensuring that the product is what it actually is, and preventing counterfeiting down the line.
Right. Good point. That's a huge topic too, anti-counterfeiting. So Daniel, what about you?
Not really tracking things that way. You know, my guess is if we were to go to production, it'd be probably more of a by order, track it through by the order through production that way, in a software.
Okay. Yep. Like Link 3D, obviously.
Oh, yes,
that's an important component.
Sure is.
They do. Jason.
Yeah, I would subscribe to Will's methodology here. With 3D print product, at least our process, like I mentioned, there's so many different variables, like the environmental conditions, facility conditions, who's working on it, what's the actual process revision, what chemical are we using, what's the rev control and so forth. And serializing product is really important for us because we need to, foreseeing issues like Will mentioned, maybe a week down the road, we see a batch of components that we didn't catch on at the time they were made, but maybe down the road before it gets to the consumer. How do we tie that back to individual process or manufacturing attributes? can we make adjustments on the fly based off of what we're seeing with our data collection and serializing them based off of the date they were made, the printer they made on, the batch code of the material that was used to print it, and so forth. So that's hypercritical. Certainly anti-counterfeiting as well. But as we go into mass customization, not just in the footwear industry, but other industries, it's important to tie that particular customer's product that's been printed to that customer's information. So you want to make sure that you're sending the customer the right product that they actually ordered. So from a supply chain perspective, that's hypercritical.
Sure.
And if I could interject here real fast,
go ahead, Will.
That's with the advances that we're seeing in a lot of the products, product software, where you're able to take that customer information and the design, tie it to a serial number, and basically embed a lot of that information and design and serialization into the part geometry when you're printing. It allows you to tie in all these different aspects, both at the digital level as well as the physical level for your end product.
Yeah, and I want to add two things, because this is, we're sort of focusing on the consumer. Well, the consumer discussions always go back over into how do you actually produce these at a price point that makes sense as an alternative to CNC machining and injection molding, because even if you can get to market twice as fast, but the product costs twice as much, maybe consumers just aren't going to pay for that. You're limiting the number of people that you can engage with. But there's two aspects of this that I think everybody should be focused on, and this is where it goes to marking, and this is traceability for customers. For those of you that are, that went out during the pandemic and went to a restaurant, if you were lucky to find one that was open, you almost always had to scan a barcode for the menu, right? And that was practical, touch a menu. But QR codes and having an ability to scan a code, I don't know if you remember, but years ago, and I think Walmart created it. I could be wrong, but there was this little wand scanner where you could scan a barcode, a UPC code off of any product, and it would generate coupons for you and stuff like that. I mean, this is probably like 20 years ago, and it would plug into a serial port on a computer and run this little software application. But it was a great idea back then, not necessarily for creating coupons, but for example, for part reordering. It may not apply to any of your particular businesses, but imagine you're an engineer, or you're a consumer, and you've bought a piece of equipment and you need to be able to quickly identify what that part is. It would be nice if there was a code that could be scanned on each of those components, so you can retrieve product manuals and setup instructions, reordering instructions if a part's wore out, or if it's a consumable product, in a part that needs to be replenished, things like that. So, track and trace, and even serialization, barcoding, ID, it's not just for production. I think there's a lot of application for consumers. Not saying that you're going to put a barcode on every potato head piece, like the ears and the nose, so you can reorder some of those pieces. I think it's something that everyone that is producing parts for consumers should be thinking. Somebody posted a question in here: what's the difference between a consumer and a customer? I don't necessarily know, unless we're talking about industrial customers versus the end use consumers. But one point that they brought out was customer experience, and that's one thing that I know all three of you are very closely focused on. And in the solutions that we're looking at, that's a big part of it as well. And is how do you improve the customer experience through additive, where maybe it's not as easy to do with some of the more traditional manufacturing methods. Let me go through here. The next question, or another one of the questions, was, do we have ideas for speeding up CAD and 3D design to enable mass customization? What are your thoughts on that? Because that is a part of all three of your businesses, even Daniel's in the future. So, Will, why don't you take this?
Sure. So, kind of in order to bridge that gap between the customer and the actual 3D design, that's exactly what we're doing. But we're doing it manually. In the past, I've worked with companies where we've been designing products that were fully laser scanned like biological data for each customer. And managing that workflows was very difficult, and translating it into both additive manufacturing methodologies as well as conventional manufacturing methods. But what we've seen in the last, actually, even in the last year, we've seen a lot more technologies that spring up that are able to connect that e-commerce side of things with the consumer data and start generating CAD and outputting it right at the end. And as long as you have your design set up from the beginning to be parametric and to include a lot of these different features, you're able to either import services that are generated and create the final part, or be able to just generate an entire part from the get-go to have a part that is able to be manufactured by additive or conventional manufacturing.
So Jason, let me ask you to be a little bit more specific if you can. And that is, there's a whole bunch of tools out there from companies like Dendrite and Topology, Polygonica, Hyperganic, and others, and many others you may have already worked with. Do you see any of those tools evolving, making it easier for you to quickly create some of these more complex designs? What Will's talking about is going and getting to a practical design, regardless of how you're going to produce it, but a practical, real 3D model. And the same is true for you, maybe with a little bit more complexity. What are your thoughts as far as the tools available today?
Yeah, so from a design perspective, certainly the tools are out there. There's so many that you might want to, any industry might want to work with for their product. The difficult part, I think, is the consumer interface and building some sort of template or bucketize various aspects of your product that the customer can customize. Those tools exist. New Balance has done some initiative with 3D knitting in the past, where there's like a consumer interface on our website where the customer can change colors, angles, shapes, colors, and apply that to a knit where it's then files then generated, and that would go to our knitting machines directly to make a one-off for that customer. Doing it from a 3D printing perspective, I don't think is a huge jump to make, and certainly there's tools out there to do that. But it's the connection into the actual company-wide ERP, PLM systems that I think is going to be the difficult integration for any company to integrate those into existing software platforms to customize product. Every company has their own nuances as far as how complicated or I'll say dated some of their ERP systems might be. Sure. And connecting that in from all the way from the front end where the customer's on their computer making changes, like from like an aesthetic or performance aspect on a product that they want to have 3D printed and made for them, that needs to go through several steps, even in an automated workflow, before it gets to a printer and then is actually printed, and then ultimately connected, serialized like we spoke with, and then shipped back to that customer. So connecting all those dots before it gets back to the customer, I think is the biggest challenge, at least from a software workflow and an integration and ultimately cost perspective for the company starting that up. So there are some hurdles to get over for companies looking to do this, but there's certain milestones along the way that you could do some more manual processes like Will was speaking of to kind of do some stopgap work there.
Sure. I know we're at the 5/4 minute mark here, so I'm gonna ask Daniel if he wants to make a comment on that, or if there was something else, another question that caught his eye that we didn't get to. And certainly, I'm not sure if you guys are hanging around afterwards, and folks can reach out to you that way. But why don't we do this? Daniel, I'm going to let you sort of tie it off for Hasbro and yourself. And maybe if you want to let people know how they could get in touch with you, if they wanted to reach out and shoot you a question or something like that. So, Daniel, take it away.
Yeah, I can reach out to through LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. If you want to reach out, feel free. Friend request, send a message, all that good stuff.
Okay. Any parting thoughts for you, Daniel?
I mean, this was great panel to be on. It was really fun to talk with Jason again and meet you, Will. This was awesome. I really appreciate the invite.
Cool. Jason?
Yeah, like Dan said, great way to contact me. If anyone has any challenges on scaling from like a lab scale to full on manufacturing for 3D products, I'm your guy. I can help you solve some of those issues that would come along the way.
Cool. And Will?
Yeah, you can find us on Instagram at Albatross Bikes. You can reach out to me through our website, albatrossbikes.com. Email, as you may have seen in the opening slide, is info@albatross.com. That'll find its way to me eventually. And if you have any questions regarding the implementation of 3D printing and working alongside conventional manufacturing methods, whether it's CNC, welding, brazing, all this kind of stuff, that's what we focus on, is blending those technologies together and working with them in order to create a very both customized and unique end product. So please feel free to reach out to me at any of those points of contact, and I'd be happy to help out.
Cool. Well, thank you, guys. And I want to thank real quick Janet, Shane, Vishal, Daniel, Roxanne, everyone else at Link3D for giving us the opportunity to participate in this panel, and Jason, Will, and Daniel. It was nice meeting you guys, and I look forward to talking with you guys in the future. And on behalf of HP, I just want to thank you guys for a great event.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anthony from HP, Daniel from Hasbro, Jason from New Balance, and Will from Albatross Bikes for joining today and sharing your insights on the future of the consumer product landscape. You guys touched on some fascinating perspectives. You know, from the initial discussions today about how do you develop that storyline regarding 3D printing and enabling the end user, there are a lot more variety in the perspective. There's one perspective of, you know, customers just want it fast and don't really care what it is as long as it's high quality. Then you've got folks saying like, hey, if they're really into the technicalities, additive manufacturing can be a great differentiator. And then, like we heard with Jason, if it's a niche market that supports the trends of today, there could be a great opportunity to differentiate your brand with additive manufacturing as well. So that's really exciting. And then you guys come from a range of different experiences to support additive, from mass personalization to mass production and rapid prototyping. So it's fascinating to hear your perspectives on enabling scale. How do you go from handful to dozens, considering print volume, material volume? How do you enable post-processing and optimizing that? And then on top of that, you guys also mentioned the role of design software or software itself to support scale, not only on the design front, but also on the workflow side. And also thanks, Anthony, for giving us some insights and drawing how students can best prepare themselves for the future. Get dirty with your CAD software and try all the different technologies to support yourself and build a portfolio so you could hopefully come in front of Hasbro, HP, New Balance, Albatross Bike with your skill sets so they can help bring you on board and do some amazing things together. And finally, we touched on amazing Q&A sessions about, you know, serialization, the different ways to go about it. Maybe you don't need to do it as much like we see with Hasbro, or maybe you need to do it with a fine-tuned code, like Jason mentioned. So thank you so much for sharing your perspectives. Anthony, before we close this, any last words, any key takeaways you have that you want to sum up before we end this call?
No, other than I am one of the ultimate consumers. I'm an addict at cycling, and my wife is a CrossFit instructor, and so she'll be spending lots of money with New Balance, and I'm also a very big kid, so I also help fund Daniel's paycheck quite often with my purchases. So it's fun. It's great. Three awesome companies that are really helping drive the future of really cool products for consumers at a lower price point, right? And that's so we can all buy more stuff. So thank you.
Thank you. And I guess as closing words on behalf of Link3D, we thank everyone for joining us today. We had over 250 people that popped in and out throughout the last 9 hours or so. So we really thank everyone for their time. We're really excited to see how there's so many organizations willing to advocate for additive manufacturing for the consumer product organization. This was the first time we've ever hosted a consumer AIM event. If you guys think this was beneficial for you, feel free to reach out to myself or Daniel. We'd be happy to explore maybe hosting this more regularly. Without further ado, Daniel, any last words you have before we end this call and bring everyone to the virtual networking floor?
Yeah, I just can add to Shannon's comment. It was a real great event. We went all the way from prototyping through serious manufacturing, mass customization, personalization, tooling tricks and pictures, until towards you guys telling us how you see the future in the consumer product market. Also, on the behalf of Link3D, I want to thank all the speakers, all the moderators, all the partners which had virtual tables on that event, sharing their knowledge, their wisdom, and it was a great event. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you, everybody. See you on the virtual floor.